Dear Public Education, we've been together for more than 20 years now, and the past few years you've taken a direction that has me on the verge of leaving. But before I do, I have a few requests. You see, for the past 7 years, I've served as a practitioner of social and emotional learning. In this role, I've worked in depth with concepts like mindset, well-being, resilience, belonging, human relationships, and overall interacting with our world through a social and emotional lens. So I know what you're doing right now is wrong. I started noticing this change about 4 to 5 years ago when my department began engaging with diversity, equity, and inclusion theory and practice. I now refer to this framework as orthodox diversity, equity, and inclusion, or ODEI for short. My new learning raised a lot of questions. Part of my re-education included learning that values of individualism, meritocracy, and believing that all people are created equally by their Creator are the reasons for racism and bigotry. This is factually untrue. In reality, these are the values that liberate humans from oppression. I also learned that logic and reason are supposedly instruments that uphold white supremacy. This is another fallacy that's currently being accepted. Over the years, I have spent hundreds of hours in ODEI-focused trainings, meetings, etc., and have noticed that the teachings proclaim that everything associated with Judeo-Christian values, Aristotle ethics, and Enlightenment philosophies are the causes of an unjust society and are demonized as whiteness. That's simply not true. Those are the 3 pillars of Western civilization. Now, this is not only happening within our institution or even our nation. This new normal philosophy is taking root in institutions, corporations, and congregations in Western democratized societies around the world. But we're here to talk about us because we have the greatest impact on the now and the future of society and humanity. We're at a pivotal crossroads in the history of humanity. Do we forge ahead with this new normal philosophy, systematically driven by ODEI theory and practice? Or do we use our fundamental values, ethics, and philosophy to address matters of the 21st century? So with this in mind, here are my requests. First, let's pause and examine the origin, intent, impact of ODEI by examining its 3 fundamental pillars. These pillars are critical theory, intersectionality, and postmodernism philosophy. Now, on the surface, this movement may appear to be the continuation of the American Civil Rights Movement, but upon closer inspection, you'll discover that it's actually a rejection of this movement and a rejection of human liberalism altogether. In fact, anti-racist scholars Robin DiAngelo and Oslam Sensoy explicitly state this in their book, Is Everyone Really Equal? An Introduction to Key Concepts in Social Justice Education. They say, many of these movements initially advocated for a type of liberal humanism, that is, individualism, freedom, and peace, but quickly turned into a rejection of human liberalism. Liberal humanism is the idea that people are free to make independent, rational decisions that determine their own fate, was viewed as the mechanism for keeping the marginalized in their place. So therefore, the central idea of this movement is that somehow removing individual autonomy is the key to creating a just and equitable society. So therefore, once individual liberties are removed, a better version of humanity will somehow emerge. That is not only false, it is historically dangerous. Now, even though ODEI didn't begin to structurally take shape until around 2010, Its underlying philosophy goes back nearly 100 years. In 1923, Max Horkheimer, Theodor Adorno, and Herbert Marcuse, and other Marxist scholars established the Institute for Social Research, later referred to as the Frankfurt School. It was a think tank established to correct the recent failings of traditional Marxism and develop a means for dismantling Western democracies. They determined that previous attempts for revolution failed because there were only two groups in conflict with each other, the proletariat and the bourgeois. So they hypothesized that creating multiple oppressed groups and uniting them against a single oppressor group would create the necessary conflict to ignite the revolution. This is Marxist conflict theory applied to social groups rather than economic groups, and is commonly referred to as Western Marxism. This is an underlying idea of orthodox diversity and inclusion. Another ODEI tenet that emerged from the Frankfurt School is critical theory. Critical theory scholarship is predicated on the hypothesis that over time, Western democracies will erode themselves after several generations of its citizenry engaged in constant cynical criticism towards itself and its history. So critical theory was first published in 1937 by Max Horkheimer as a rejection of traditional theory. The traditional theory worldviews essentially seek to understand, while the critical theory worldview is criticized to crumble. Throughout the decades, critical theory has evolved into a multitude of theories for examining identity group oppression, and overall has become the institutionalized scholarship and practice of modern society. The basis of critical theory is to identify, notice, and point out oppression, racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, xenophobia, ableism, etc. in every situation, in every societal institution, and in every human relationship and interaction. And adopting this mindset and worldview is a goal, and it's called developing a critical consciousness, and is commonly referred to now as being woke. Therefore, ODEI is not only cultivating mindsets to see the problem in every instance and every relationship, but the prescribed treatment is to engage in a constant cynical criticism while simultaneously envisioning utopia in hopes of a perfect version of humankind to emerge. Again, this is factually false and historically dangerous. So pragmatically speaking, critical theory will never solve the issues related to personal well-being and societal cooperation, because it was formulated to dismantle society, not improve it. So my question is, why are we continuing to use this as a solution tool? The second pillar of ODEI is intersectionality. In 1989, Kimberly Crenshaw introduced intersectionality as a worldview in which the individual is absorbed into a group identity and assigned personality traits according to their inherent gender, racial, and ethnic features. Intersectionality proclaims that identities intersect in ways so that people experience varying degrees of oppression and privilege based on the sum of their inherent traits. For example, a black woman is more oppressed than a black man, and a homosexual black woman is more oppressed than a heterosexual black woman. The more oppressed groups an individual can claim, the higher their status and likelihood for social and economic mobility. The more oppressed groups an individual is assigned, the lesser their status and opportunities for social mobility and economic mobility. Therefore, ODEI is systematically replacing systems of competence and character with a caste system determined by our born-into traits. Intersectionality explicitly prioritizes group identity above our greater humanity. Now, when we cannot see each other as we see ourselves, we psychologically create systems that allow us to harm the other. Therefore, structuring society around this concept will have humanity pitted against each other until eternity. The final ODEI pillar I'd like to discuss is postmodernism philosophy. Postmodernism emerged in the mid-20th century as a repudiation of the Age of Enlightenment, a pillar of Western civilization. Postmodern claims there is no objective natural reality, there is no logic, no reason, and morality. They're all social constructs rather than all-encompassing truths. Postmodernism is reflective in ODEI practices by not only how it prioritizes one's lived experiences over logic and reason, but how ODEI proclaims that logic and reason are instruments that promote white supremacy. Therefore, logic and reason as tools for solving problems are abandoned. A society that rejects truth, logic, and reason is destined to ascend into chaos and crumble. For some reason, our profession and society at large are adopting this concept as a truth. Again, this is not true and historically dangerous. All right, so those are the overarching pillars of ODEI. Now let's look at its impact. An inconvenient truth regarding our humanity that ODEI ignores is that every human being is wired with the capacity for prejudice, aggression, cruelty, and a propensity for tribalistic behaviors as survival features. Perhaps ODEI ignores this because its practices and theory strengthen these capacities. In 2010, the Equality and Human Rights Commission published a study on the psychological basis for prejudice. The report found that prejudice is more likely to persist where people see their identity in terms of belonging to a particular group. And groups have different or conflicting key values. And they view others as different, and the groups discriminate against each other. This is the narrative of orthodox diversity, equity, and inclusion theory and practice. So it's setting up the necessary psychological and behavioral human division and conflict the Frankfurt School scholars hypothesized would erode Western civilization. So a final request before I go. I need to know where you stand, morally and philosophically. Do you believe in honoring and developing each unique individual? Or are you going to proceed with the notion that society's moral authority is in the group, like this Western Marxism is guiding us towards? Do you see the value in maintaining a free society, or will you continue advancing the new normal of this Western Marxism worldview? Now, ultimately, I hope you discontinue advancing this new normal Western Marxist worldview, but I'm not sure that you will. So while you mull it over, I am choosing to take an overt pro-humanity and pro-Western democracy stance and be of service and in community with those that choose to do the same. With gratitude, Jason.